listen.
Hello, everyone. This is Data Driven Chat, and today I'm very happy to present Dr. Djamila Amimer. She is a founder and CEO at Mind Senses Global. She is a consultant, speaker, and author, and I'm just very happy to have her with us today. Hello, Djamila. How are you?
Hi, Ganna. I'm fine, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks a lot for finding the time. I know you're extremely busy. So can you tell us, how did you become interested in data science and artificial intelligence? So what was your personal journey into this field?
Yes, sure. So my journey with AI and data science started with my academic background. So I've studied mathematics and operations research. And then I found myself doing research in fuzzy logic, in genetic algorithms, neural networks, and that was really the beginning of AI. And then I continued the journey around like doing more research in AI. And then I tried to do to get like a job that was kind of so I had done like a PhD in AI around like 2001. At that time, AI was not that attractive from a job perspective. So then went to work for the oil and gas industry. Where I had like several business development strategic roles, and then had the opportunity to apply AI, even though you wouldn't call them AI inside the company. And then decided to leave the sector and founded the Mind Senses Global, which is a boutique AI management consultancy. So our main mission is to help businesses and organizations apply AI. So started with AI, had a little bit of detour, and then back to AI again.
Okay, well, that's yeah, that's an amazing career, and yeah, I mean, you started I think earlier than quite a few people that we had on this podcast. Yeah, so I think I think back in the day, I guess when you studied mathematics, probably wasn't very cool, but now it's it's probably the hottest the hottest subject to study, and definitely being in AI, there's so much hype around the topic right now.
Absolutely.
So you probably found yourself like in a big demand all of a sudden. So for people who are not familiar with your work, I know you have quite a lot of podcasts and videos that I saw on social media. So definitely we'll make some suggestions for people underneath this video. But can you, for those people who are not familiar with your work, can you pick one most important thing that you have done in your career, something you are most proud of, and tell us about it?
Wow. I've done like a lot of things around like like in business in the oil and gas sector, but I think kind of like talking about AI and going back around, you mentioned the AI hype. So one thing that I continuously worry about is the AI hype, because like I go to conferences, I go to talk to people, and I see kind of like some of the confusion around what is AI, around like the capabilities of AI, some kind of exaggerated kind of claims out there. So one thing that I'm very proud of, part of kind of the Mind Senses global offering, is the AI education.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously we help clients, apply AI through kind of, we help them to develop like an AI strategy. We have the capabilities to build the tools, but something that I'm really passionate and spend a lot of time is, the education. I have done like a couple of like workshops on AI, but also as you mentioned, kind of like podcasts, webinars, because I think the only way to tackle the AI hub is through kind of raising the AI awareness and through AI education.
So can you tell us a little bit, again, for people who are not familiar with what you do? I mean, they will be familiar after this, but for those who are not familiar, can you tell us like this educational programs that you are designing in Mind Senses Global, are they directed towards like what kind of audience is that? Are you working with executives? Are you working with young professionals? Like what is the focus of
yeah, so we have like three type of AI education kind of like focus. So one is obviously the business executive type of audience, because they need to understand AI to open their mind in terms of the benefits it can add to the business. So that's one audience. The other one is the data scientists, because like a lot of data scientists, having completing, degrees and like keen to get into it, face the challenges in the reality that like theory is very different from reality. And, how you attain, the soft skills and all, the business skills and all the necessary skills to make kind of like an AI project works in an enterprise. So we also tailor kind of very different kind of training for this, category of audience. And then the third audience is just like general public. So for this type of audience, this is what I usually do through podcasts, either on my own or through partnership with other companies. So each audience will have a completely different program.
So yeah, I mean, that's great that you address in all segments in education. So that's actually very interesting. And kind of, I guess a follow-up question would be, considering that you are focused on AI education, a lot of people who listen to this podcast, they are aspiring data scientists, so they want to get into artificial intelligence field. So someone who works in data science and AI, especially from the angle that you just told us about, from the angle of education, can you give some tips to people who want to get into data science, who want to get into AI? Where do they start? What is the best thing to do, at the beginning when you don't know much about it?
Yeah. So I guess obviously like a lot of materials out there, in the public domain around like AI and data science, but like my tips will be around, so try to get like a good foundation around data science and AI. And like for me, kind of like a solid understanding of mathematics is really important. Because kind of if you are dealing with algorithms and you don't even understand kind of the assumptions or the limitations of those algorithms, you will just find yourself making mistakes later on in the future. So get a good foundation of mathematics, statistics, to understand kind of like the algorithms and the techniques themselves. And then I'll urge them to try, to get involved in, projects, because kind of like the earlier you can make the jump from theory to practice, the better. So one way to do it is there are like a lot of initiatives around like AI for good.
Right.
Or you can go to Google or GitHub, and you'll find the competitions, you'll find projects. So find one of those kind of like channels and get involved with the kind of like a project, and kind of like by doing it and repeating the process, you will get better. In terms of overall tip, if kind of you're looking into getting kind of like a data science job in a business or in an enterprise, I think for me, in order to differentiate yourself compared to other kind of data scientists, getting the business domain knowledge will be very important.
Yeah.
Together with the soft skills, how, team working, influencing others, how do you convey the message in a clear way, how can you explain very complex concept, and let's agree, most of those techniques in AI and data science, they're complex. How can you convey the message in a very simple, clear way? All those skills will help the data scientists to excel in their job.
Yeah, so I think I completely agree with you that kind of learning by doing is extremely important, and perhaps even for people who are not, who do not have a solid mathematical background, that's a way to kind of get a taster of what to expect when you're working in the field. So yeah, but of course, mathematical background or doing some training in in more kind of technical subjects would definitely, natural sciences would be actually essential. So You also doing quite a bit of consulting, and
Yeah.
my next question kind of is concerns. Well, it's kind of addressed to you with your consultant hat on,
Okay.
and that is about kind of the importance of data for business, right? So we currently have access to types of data that we probably didn't have, and amounts of data that we didn't have just a few years back. So, in your opinion, how did, or to what extent, data changes business? Is it that did we see the full potential of data realized by now, or is it still, are we still waiting to see? How, basically, are we still waiting to see how data science can realize its full potential in business?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think there are like two things. One is around kind of obviously the availability of data.
Mm-hmm.
Now kind of with kind of like we have more data. Every company is collecting like tons of data, about their clients or customers. So the availability of data suddenly kind of like an aha moment. We have all these, can we do something about it? So I think the availability is like key. One of the things that I see kind of like, with clients and, with the work we do is obviously the data is key, but the quality of the data is even more important.
Mm-hmm.
Because kind of as we see, like, you've also seen kind of like in the work, we do, we all, are in the same area. It's kind of like, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
So unless this is kind of like when we do AI strategy, we emphasize with the clients around, okay, let's kind of like park AI or data science aside. Tell me, what is your problem? We never start talking about AI. We always start with the problem. So understanding kind of like the business performance, what are kind of like the problems the clients want to address, or the business want to address. And then part of that journey, let's try to find kind of a way to apply AI to solve the problem. So one of the things we found kind of, okay, so what kind of data are you collecting? Maybe, you may have tons of data, but maybe none of it is going to help you address the particular problem you want to address. So it's all about kind of, not only the structure or the system. You may have the system, but you really need to think about what kind of data you need to have. And then once you identify the data, this is then, okay, how we can refine the quality. In terms of the application of data science, I think it is making a lot of impact in the business. We've seen, so for example, if we take and this is across the board. So if you take kind of like, for example, sales and marketing as a function, whatever business you are in, you can see, and I'm sure you will agree with me, Ganna, is like we've seen a lot of kind of like, significant kind of changes in the way sales and marketing is done today compared how it was done 5 or 10 years ago.
Right.
Now with the ability to personalize, kind of like, the sales and marketing too. So, now because we have such a huge data, we can know, yeah, Djamila, she visited this website. This is her preferences. She may likely, like this product. And then suddenly I will get a message saying, would you like to buy product A or B? So kind of like the way sales and marketing, is done today has significantly changed, thanks to the availability of data, but thanks also to the data science.
Yeah, and I guess you touched on many important things, and I guess like for my team, for example, we always, apart from problem statement that you mentioned, that is extremely important, we also try to find out, do you actually need AI to solve the problem? So sometimes I think you can solve the problem with much cheaper approach, and that's kind of the first thing that we assess. But I guess that's kind of part of what you're saying. I mean, is it really necessary? And if it is necessary, then you start to think about how to apply it, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Kind of one of the other thing we do. So even if it is necessary, so if you are a business, let's say kind of banking, what we will do is we will do like a review of the banking sector for the kind of the client, and then we will show them how AI has been used so far in banking, and we will do like a competitive landscape. So we will show them how they're ranked compared to their competitors in terms of the use of AI. And then this is the kind of where it comes. So let's suppose, I don't like to exaggerate and say there are like 100 ways to use AI, but let's say there are like a dozen of ways you can use AI to improve your business performance.
Mm-hmm.
You really need to know and pick the one that adds the most value to your business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of like, so it's not just like whether AI is necessary, but if there are like several ways to do it, you will have to, to find kind of which one to pick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree with you. In terms of so you already mentioned the importance of kind of core education for kind of developing AI skills. I want to ask you a bit more specific question on that, and that would be around coding. So some people, think that they could do AI without the ability to code. Others believe that coding is absolutely essential. So in your view, how important is the ability to code? Do you really need it? Because the reason I ask this question is that, I have quite a few executive students who are leading teams, right? And so they're not necessarily possessing like I said, the educational background or the coding skills, but they have to, they own these areas within organizations, and they are constantly thinking, do I have to learn Python? Do I have to learn R in order to be able to lead my team? So that's where this question comes from.
Yeah, that's a very good question. I'm really borderline, on this question. So I don't think that coding is critical or important, but at the same time, I think as a data scientist, you are kind of like expected to know at least a minimum level of coding. I don't think it's critical, because for me what is critical is really to have kind of the statistical kind of foundation, so you understand all those techniques you are dealing with. Because for me kind of coding is just like translating those techniques in kind of in usable manner for kind of the machines and the computers to execute it. So I think I'll favor the mathematics, the statistics, the business domain knowledge more than coding. But having said that, it doesn't mean that you don't need to know coding at all. I think a minimum level of coding is necessary. Especially just to ensure kind of like that, like that the algorithms are transparent, that ethical, that there is due diligence. So you either have the coding skills to do it. If not, then you'll have to bring someone else who can do that coding, and supervise that the coding is fine for you.
I also would like to talk to you about diversity and inclusion in tech-dominated, data-driven industries. And you are CEO yourself in the high-tech, sector. And so essentially, yes, the first question is, do you think we have a problem with women participation in STEM? And the reason I asked that is that several people on this podcast challenged that. So, and if we do have a problem, how can we solve this problem with just talking about female representation in STEM?
I think be kind of like objective. So if you look at pure statistics,
right,
whether you're looking at like female or women like in STEM education or STEM kind of like related work, or the tech industry, the figures speak for themselves. So we cannot just like deny that there isn't an issue of diversity, whether you're a woman or from an ethnic minority, because I think it's like a more kind of like broader
of course it's a broader program.
We cannot deny the fact that there is somehow an issue. I think the way to go about it, I think there are like things we can do at the education level, so before even they reach the age where that they start working. So at education, I think it helps to get like more girls into kind of like STEM education. I think kind of like having a role model
Mm-hmm.
is very beneficial. So I think, and I have to thank you, for the work you do, in your current job, but also kind of in the podcast, because kind of the more kind of like more diverse people you invite to your podcast, you show kind of, you give like a spectrum view of those role models for, the audience. So I
Yeah,
think
thank
like
you.
having
Thank you.
a role.
I just want to return the compliment, and likewise, thank you for your work and
Thank you.
your contribution to role modeling in this space. I think it's very important.
Thank you. So I think it's role model. Then kind of like if they're already working, kind of obviously it still helps to then have a role model, kind of like who was able to go up the ladder, because kind of some of the companies are succeeding into getting women into the roles, but then when you look into in terms of the career progression, they're really staying kind of at the lower like levels. Then we don't see the same rate of kind of progression compared kind of to you know uh, white male audience, for example. So I think kind of like job wise, so the mentoring bit will be still helpful, but I think kind of, I'm sure Ghana, you have noticed the same. So sometimes you go to conferences and you find kind of like more male speakers than compared to women
Mm-hmm.
speakers. Sometimes they're like even like panel discussions where it just happened that all the panelists are men and there is no female, there. So I think kind of what we can do is like help the visibility of the women that are already working in the field
Mm-hmm.
by giving them a platform to to be speakers, to present their work, to to participate at panel discussions. So I think visibility will also help. So any kind of platform that gives that will help address the issue.
Do you think that there's also kind of an issue that um, I guess representatives of the majority in general are not paying attention to what's happening in kind of underrepresented groups, so like women or minorities, because the usual excuse is we couldn't find anybody. We couldn't find
Yeah,
any.
it's like,
Like,
well, I'm I'm here, you are here, like that, like a lot of hundreds of women in the field who are there. I'm not sure. I think the issue is kind of, especially with this type of conferences and panel discussion, it's kind of like usually based on kind of like networks.
yeah,
So
yeah.
if kind of like you are from a certain group,
Mm-hmm.
and your network kind of like, obviously you network maybe with people similar to you, then you will end up inviting people who who maybe who looks like you, or but like if you have a more diverse network, then you may be able to get a more diverse. I think it's back to networking and visibility.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, we just recently had a case when there was a very high profile conference, and the main organizer came out and responding to critique about why there are so few women keynote speakers. He said that we just couldn't find anybody, and then someone in reply to that just wrote a list of everybody that they could have invited. So yeah, I just think there is just also a lack of I think like I said, I think we are lazy to some extent in trying to find out who is doing interesting work, and so that has to change, definitely. Maybe we should have some sort of I don't know, profile database with where we all kind of showcase what we do and list our
Yeah.
interests or something like this. Or, despite the fact that we have LinkedIn, probably it's not very good for that, because there's so many
Yeah.
things on LinkedIn apart from AI and data science. So maybe there's a separate system that we need. But definitely, yeah, we just maybe lack visibility in that space, and it
Yeah.
would improve
And
if we have more visibility.
Yeah, and I think it's relevant to any kind. So we're talking about diversity, abroad, so not just like to women's, women, ethnic minority, whatever kind of, your, orientation, where you come from, or even like, kind of within kind of like the white male, there's still, so we want kind of like diversity of thinking.
Right, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Regardless of your color or race or religion or kind of like sex, or we want kind of like people who can bring different ideas to the table.
Yeah, yes, that's absolutely right. So obviously we cannot avoid the topic of coronavirus that is affecting everybody's life. So in terms of the contribution of data science to the current solutions of the crisis, what do you think is the most promising, or maybe several promising applications where data science could really help? And I guess in general, do you think that data science causes more chaos there or helps? Because we had several people on
Yeah,
this podcast who said, oh, we shouldn't get involved unless we work with epidemiologists who know about these things.
yeah,
So,
yeah,
I'm just curious about
yeah,
what your take on this is. Like, where can we help, and if we should get involved at all, or should we just wait
yeah.
for the professionals to to do it?
I think kind of like I'm midway. So kind of I think kind of there is a lot of potential for AI and data science to help kind of the COVID crisis. Having said that, and I think kind of a lot of data scientists have like built models, and kind of like in terms of especially when it comes to predicting kind of like the likelihood and the trend of the disease. My caution, so I would love to see more of that work, but like my questions is like, please, data scientists, AI researchers like myself and everybody in the, involved, is please be humble, don't be arrogant.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's good to do those modeling, but acknowledge again, to the question, even in the business, you need to have the business domain. So don't make your, your model in isolation by yourself, and then claim that kind of your model is kind of is going to solve it. And, it's like the magic wonder. You have to take into account kind of the domain knowledge of kind of like people dealing with the science of kind of like of illnesses and disease, and how kind of like an epidemic kind of like goes, and what's the science behind it. So I think it's cool to have those application, but kind of like you need to incorporate the views and involve these people in the work. In terms of kind of how AI can help COVID, so I think I can already see two things that like that obviously there have been development in. One is around how can you detect that the person has already caught the disease.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I'm sure Ganna, you are like in the in the field, kind of like one of the kind of like good things about like deep learning is that it has significantly increased the accuracy rate when it comes to image recognition. So there is no surprise when we say that one of the first application of AI for COVID-19 is to detect the disease through the scans of the lungs.
Mm-hmm.
Because kind of like machines are very, very good. Well, obviously there's still limitations and kind of bias, and obviously those things need to be addressed. But like they're like good at detecting images. So so that was one way on how AI was used. So that's for detecting the
Mm-hmm.
disease. The second one is when it comes to triage. So once you know that the patient has the virus, obviously we've seen from the data and the statistics that not everyone has been impacted by the COVID in the same way. Some have gone were very lucky. They have very, very little symptoms, some no symptoms at all. Whereas, some poor ones, they really, had like the severe symptoms, and obviously a lot of that. So that's kind of the kind of category we don't want to be in. So one way AI has been used is like to do the triage of the patients at the early stage when you know that the person, so if you have 100 of people that have been identified having caught COVID, which one is likely to have the most severe kind of COVID? So at least then you can then prioritize the treatment and do a lot more kind of intensive treatment for those type of patients. So then, to avoid them, being in that severe state.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's another way AI care could help.
Absolutely. And so from this sort of one particular problem, I want to zoom out to data science as a whole and ask you this question about, the issues that, the challenges that data science is currently facing. So what do you think those challenges are? And do you think there were some challenges that maybe were particularly highlighted by the current coronavirus crisis? So is it that we are facing the challenges that we faced last year and they just continued to this year? Or was there something that emerged, something that we apparently don't do very well and we really need to pay attention in the view of the current situation?
Yeah, so I've already mentioned the domain knowledge, so I'm not going to expand a lot, but we've seen that kind of how critical is to have the domain knowledge, because if you don't really have it, you will end up with a garbage model that can predict anything, and obviously you can't base kind of like your resources and action on something that is poor quality. So this is
you also mentioned the quality of data. So so that's domain knowledge, quality of data. These problems.
The other thing that obviously COVID has highlighted, and I think we touched a little bit earlier, but maybe that's the time to expand, is talking about data privacy, ethical use of AI, and we've seen it a lot in those apps that track. So it's the tracing or the tracking of people who who got infected, and maybe you got close to them, and so that type of application has raised a lot of issues that were already there. So nothing is new around the data privacy, the privacy of people, but it just made them, it heightened them basically.
Going from that, I want to go into the future. So looking into the future, what do you think is the future of data science? How will it change in the next 5 years? What do you think will be the hot topics in data science and AI for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think kind of like, obviously, with the AI data science / data science, obviously there are like slight differences, but let's not go into the difference in this, that could be another podcast, but we went through several AI winters.
Right.
But this kind of AI phase, this is where kind of like we see promising thing. This is where kind of, because of kind of the availability of like, computational power, this somehow kind of AI has been made accessible to everyone, to every business. If you have a smartphone, then you're probably using AI, even if you may not know it. So I think it has made it accessible. So I think what we will see is that the AI adoption level will continue to increase. I think COVID, obviously we have been all hit by kind of like the crisis. Obviously, I think it may kind of impact kind of like the digital, transformation agenda of businesses.
Yeah, personally,
I think in a positive way, because I think kind of the journey, will accelerate.
Yeah, I agree with you there.
Now the question whether they will give priority, depending in which business you are, whether you will give priority to automation first and you go to AI, or you do AI and automation at the same time. Because you may want to start with the easier bit. You may want to start with automation and then do the fancy AI.
So at the
if
beginning
you are
of
limited in budget.
at the beginning of the podcast, you were talking about education. So do you think the education will improve? Do you think people will be more aware, like in a few years, they will be more aware of the types of analysis that are done in companies, the data quality? So do you think they will be more aware of the issues and more careful about what they're doing?
I hope so, because I think nowadays I see, whether it's social media, whether it's mainstream, I see like a lot of publications, articles, kind of talking about AI, highlighting kind of like the benefits, but also the limitation. So and the kind of work you gonna do in this type of area. So I think the more kind of we do collectively, the more aware people will become. So I'm hoping that the awareness will continue to increase.
Mhm. You already touched several times on ethics and responsibility. I just want to kind of ask you a separate question on that and on the importance of responsibility. And so, how important are ethics and responsibility in data science, and how can one make sure that things are done ethically and responsibly in practice? So, what are the processes? Like, what is the business process? Should there be an oversight within organizations? Should there be a governmental oversight? So how do we approach, like, what's the right way to think about this?
Yeah, that's a very important question. So I think, at least that's my view. My view is like AI ethics, and responsible AI is really key. To the future of AI. Whether we do it in a good or bad way, that will determine kind of like the future of AI and our relationship to it in the future. So I think it is important that it's done in a based on a good foundation. um, for me, I think it's always better to include ethical principles or ethical processes, whatever, at the early stage of the design, because if you leave it too late, it becomes very, very costly to address the problem. And we see it happening even with tech companies who have the capabilities, they cannot do it because it's too much expensive. And one of the examples, I'm sure you know about it, but it's the Amazon recruitment tool.
Mm-hmm.
And there are like hundreds of examples like that, where a tool was developed, and then at a later stage we discover that so for the case of the recruitment tool, the tool was biased towards women. So
Mm-hmm.
for the same CV, similar CV for like a female and male, the tool was giving the technical role to a man,
Mm-hmm.
versus a woman. But what was the decision? The decision that Amazon took was to shelve the tool, or basically drop it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think kind of that shows kind of how costly it is, and how complex it is to solve the problem after the tool has been developed. So always think about ethics at the early stage. So we've seen a lot of companies, they have all come up with, even countries, they come up with what they call AI principles, AI ethical rules, whatever kind of the label. But there are like certain things that you should be aware of
Mm-hmm.
when you start thinking about developing a tool. So that's one thing. So include the rules, or the ethical principle at the design stage. The other one, I think it is important to have a diverse team,
Mm-hmm.
because the more diverse you're thinking, the highly likely you would have thought about those. So I'm sure kind of, I don't know kind of what was the team in Amazon, how many female were involved in developing that recruitment tool, or for the Google facial recognition that failed, how many ethnic minority. But I think the more diverse the team, it's more likely they'll be able to spot some
Mm-hmm.
biases, something not going right, with the process. And I think kind of like the other thing, coming up to responsible AI, it is very important to have transparent accountabilities.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go back to the idea of like a driverless car. Obviously, driverless cars, a big part of it, at least the functioning of it is based on AI.
Mm-hmm.
So if an accident or something goes bad with it, who is responsible? Is it the person is it the factory who produced the car? Is it kind of the AI data scientist who put algorithm together? Is it the one who was driving to train the car at the training stage? I think all that needs to be kind of like, look at the whole kind of supply chain. And then for each segment, you will have to identify who is responsible and what's the scope of that responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we need regulations to push us to think kind of like in that way.
Mm-hmm. So we are almost at the end of the interview, and this is a traditional question that I ask all guests. And the question is this. So if I asked you to recommend one book and one film, what would your recommendations be? These recommendations do not have to be about data science. It's just something that inspires you, something that you keep going back to, and something that you like.
Okay, thanks for the question. I think for the book, I may, stay within AI. So there have been a recent book co-authored by Stuart Russell, and I think it's called AI, A Modern Approach. And it's a good description of both the theory and the practice around applying AI. So I think I'll recommend that book. In terms of the movie, I think it's a very old movie, so kind of like, but I always have loved The Matrix. The movie The Matrix, and I think I still love it. I think it's this whole idea of like a simulated environment and kind of like intelligence. I think it's something that has stayed with me. So.
Well, thank you so much, Djamila. Thank you so much for finding the time. It was such a pleasure to have you with us today, and good luck with everything that you are doing. Sounds fascinating, and continue the good work, and we'll hopefully see more from you in the coming years. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.